I'm Larry Mone, president of the Institute, and it's my pleasure to introduce our guest. Ray Kelly is truly a man who needs no introduction, so my introduction will be brief. Manhattan Institute senior fellow Stephen Ide has written a wonderful review of Ray's new book, Vigilance, up on National Review Online. The title of the review is Ray Kelly, Gotham's Guardian, which is really perfect. As Steve notes, between 1990 and 2013, New York City went from accounting for about 10% of American homicides to just over 2%. New York City's per capita homicide rate is now lower than the national average, which is really remarkable. For those people who say crime went down everywhere, New York was an unusual and exceptional story. Ray Kelly led the NYPD for much of that time span under both mayors David Dinkins and Michael Bloomberg. He pushed the murder rate down to record lows, while also, and I think this is his most important contribution to policing history, in the wake of the September 11th attacks, he broadened the NYPD's mission to encompass fighting terrorism in addition to street crime. He literally built on the fly what I think is the finest counter-terrorism organization in the country. He is the longest-serving police commissioner in city history. The Manhattan Institute was honored to give Ray Kelly our 2009 Alexander Hamilton Award in recognition of his extraordinary leadership and accomplishments. Today, his public safety is very much in the news, and it seems that some want to roll back the successes of the past 20 years. Ray's book is a timely reminder that we should not take these achievements for granted. I'll turn the proceedings over now to MI's Vice President Howard Husock, who will interview Ray for a few minutes and then take questions from the audience. So please join me in welcoming our guest, former Commissioner Ray Kelly.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Larry. It's an honor for me to have the chance to interview the commissioner. This is a great book, and it's a book not only about policing, it's about the incredible life of this quintessential New Yorker. And I wonder if I might ask you, Commissioner, just to start with, you really described your rise from a very modest background. I don't know if everybody knows about that. A first job as an elevator operator growing up on the Old West Side, before there was Lincoln Center or any of that. And there's a lot of discussion today about upward mobility on the part of the poor and what it takes to rise. And I wonder if you would just reflect for a moment on what you consider to be the key factors that allowed you to make your way from cadet to commissioner within the New York Police Department.
Well, let me thank the Manhattan Institute for inviting me and conducting this terrific luncheon. That's a good question, and I think for me, I would have to say a two-parent household nurturing me with four very supportive siblings. I grew up on the West Side, as you say. It was a sort of a classic Irish-American household, but as I say in the book, they weren't professional Irish. But
Were you unprofessional?
They were ticket-punching Catholics. But I went to a Catholic school. Things seemed to be very orderly as I reflected on it. And I'm not that much for introspection, but I had to do it to write this book. And I look back, and I think the family environment that I had was so important, so significant. I went to Catholic high school. There was no discussion about going to public school. That was nobody ever thought about that. One thing that is mentioned in there is sort of the West Side Story aspect to my youth, where the neighborhood changes pretty quickly. A lot of people from Puerto Rico came in sort of short order in a compressed period of time, and there was friction. There was fighting, there was increase in violence, and my father was concerned about me getting involved in this. It was interesting, I just talked about this the other night. You know, the helicopter mom of today, if you go back 50-something years, 60 years, they actually made rings for me to fight in the street.
Wow.
It's a fight, you know, a young Puerto Rican boy. That was what they thought they were supposed to do. You know, so different. But to answer your question, I think that nuclear family, that support made all the difference for me. My parents were very, very supportive of education.
Let's turn to policing, because I think everybody wants to hear your views on that. As Larry referred to in his introduction, some are seeing the decline, the extraordinary decline in crime that we've seen in New York and in some other cities as inevitable, something to do with demographics, other factors other than policing. I wonder how you would respond to that kind of comment and whether the decline was inevitable.
Yeah, I think your observation is a good one. People just thought in the 2013 election that things are going to be on automatic pilot. We had 12 good years under Bloomberg. Obviously, we had good years under Giuliani. So this was all going to continue, and didn't really pay much attention to that election. And I think things have changed. You can feel it. People are coming to me and saying that there is a shifting as far as quality of life is concerned. It just feels different on the streets of Manhattan and city, I should say, and people are concerned about that. So yeah, I mean, we've all been here. There are tipping points that we have to be concerned about. Interesting, demographers tell us that there's a 40% turnover every 10 years in population in the city. So you have lots of people here, obviously lots of young people who don't remember what it was like in the late 80s, early 90s, 70s certainly. So, if people, as I say, just assume things are going to remain peaceful and crime-free or with crime low, and I don't think that's the case.
So obviously you credit the interventions and the tactics and the imaginative changes of the New York Police Department with helping to lower crime. Which of those tactics, and some of them have, as you know, come under fire, which do you think were the most important?
Yeah, certainly information, the booming of information technology. In the NYPD, on my watch, we put in place something called a real-time crime center. And the notion that it's a big organization that doesn't really know what it knows. You've got to get your arms around it. And when the Bloomberg administration came in, the department was still one of the largest users of carbon paper and whiteout. So we created a data warehouse and put information in it as much as possible. It goes on today. And the notion was, with the Real-Time Crime Center, to have this data, and sitting on top of it was a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week operation to push information out to investigators in the field, detectives in the field, under the theory that we're dealing primarily with a recidivist population. The quicker you make an arrest, the more likely, crime is obviously going to decrease. But that was a very important element, that smarter policing, more information available for policing, not only here, but throughout the country. I think your question probably leading up to the stop and frisk, a reasonable tactic, was it overused, that sort of thing. Well, it is, first of all, it comes from the common law. That's what you want your constable to do. That's what you want your police officer to do. Intervene when there's suspicious activity. Validated by a Supreme Court case, Terry versus Ohio, codified. It's on the books in every state in the union. It's a valuable tool that officers need to have in their toolbox. Was it a factor? Yes, it's certainly it's a deterrent. If you're a young person who has a gun or access to a gun, you're going to be more likely to carry it if the potential for you being stopped and questioned, and sometimes frisked, is greater. So that's one of the tactics It's a practice. It's like a reporter's notebook. It's something that police officers need. And I know there is a notion that somehow we had 40,000 stops last year or some period of time, and that's the right number. I've heard some people put out there. Well, look at it this way. We have about 19,000 police officers out of 35,000 police officers that would be in a position to stop and question someone. They'll say they're on patrol. They work about 190 tours on the street a year. You take away vacation, that sort of thing. That comes to about 3.6 million tours And if you multiply that by 7 number of hours, that's like 25 million patrol hours. Then you take that and superimpose it on a city of 8.4 million people, or maybe 10 million people in a workday. Then you look at the 911 calls. We have several thousand calls that talk about suspicious activity. So it's pretty hard with a straight face to say, hey, 40,000 is the right number in the environment that we're in. I don't think there is a right number because it has to be event-driven. It can't be quota-driven, with a certain target. It's a valuable tool. We also did things like Operation Impact, which is where we took, first of all, when the Bloomberg administration came in, the head count was going down of the department. We wound up with 6,000 fewer police officers than the previous administration. So we had to do something dramatic. It was a sort of an anomalous situation where police academy classes were big, but the head count was going down. So we took the graduates of the police academy after 6 months in training, coupled them with experienced supervisors, and put them in concentrated form in areas where there was a spike in shootings or other crimes. It worked very well for us. So I'd say there's other things, but those 3 things: much better use of technology and information available to the police. Stop, question, and frisk is a valuable tool. Operation Impact worked very well for us because we saturated areas where police officers see each other. It wasn't spread out like it had been in the past.
Yeah, so the ultimate effect of that is to bring policing to where crime might be.
Sure, and the police get there because they're called to a large extent too.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that. People in minority communities, poorer communities, they're calling for the police.
Right. Disproportionately.
Disproportionate amount of police services there, largely because they're called there by the people who live in those communities.
One of the most compelling parts of this book are the 16 terror plots that you write about in great detail, dramatic detail. The man who was really going to try to take down the Brooklyn Bridge. This was not in his imagination. He went there. He had a plan, right? And he was deterred by changes that the department had made. I'm wondering why you felt it was so important to include the details of all of those 16 plots as such a big part of your book.
Because it's interesting. We'll have one of these cases. It'll be in the media. It'll burn brightly for a day or two, and then it's forgotten about. I put them in there to the extent people read the book, to remind them of the 16 plots. If you stop somebody in the street and say, you realize, at least in the Bloomberg 12 years, that there were 16 plots against the city by terrorists. They all failed. Some as a result of good work on the part of the NYPD, good work on the part of the FBI, and sheer luck. People are surprised about that. Some were very serious. We had a plot against going to blow up the PATH tunnel in Lower Manhattan, flood that tunnel, have water go through it, and flood Lower Manhattan, which would have been really catastrophic. You look what happened with Sandy, let alone something like this. We had Najib Azazi, who came here with his 2 companions to blow themselves up on the New York subway system on September 14, 2009, when President Obama was in town. We had Faisal Shahzad, who rode into Times Square on May 1st, 2010, and he wasn't on anybody's radar screen. We knew nothing about him. He was going to blow the car up next to the Marriott Hotel. He was ultimately arrested. But these other people, we had inklings. We were able to get some advance information. With him, we knew nothing about him. So that was one of the reasons to lay out these 16 plots, to have people focus on the fact that, hey, no other city has had 16 plots against it. New York is still a choice target, the primary target, according to intelligence communities. And this threat is going to continue, in my judgment, for a long time to come.
At the same time, is there an implication that you're including that there needs to be a local anti-terror capacity? Otherwise, these would not have been interrupted? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think you have to look at sort of take a historical perspective. Mayor Bloomberg came into office 3.5 months after 9/11, the horrific events. I was police commissioner during the first World Trade Center attack. So we believed, the administration believed, we had to do something more. We were certainly not looking to supplant the federal government. We need them. But we were looking to supplement, for a variety of reasons. We thought we could certainly help in that regard, but also to raise the comfort level in the city. Early on in the administration, Times Square was pretty much empty. You look at it on a camera and you see traffic going through. People were leaving the city. There was a prediction that was widely given that New York was going to be subjected to another terrorist attack. It wasn't if, but when. And also, with that crime was going to go up, lots of dire predictions. So some of that we did to sort of raise the comfort level. But NYPD is the largest police department in the country. Has 54,000 employees, 35,000 uniform officers. Great diversity, great internal skills. And I was in the federal government, during my 2 stints. I think I learned a lot of how the federal government operates. And we just felt we needed to do more. We had unique skills, people who knew the city. We engaged in a very robust recruitment campaign, and now there are police officers in the NYPD born in 106 countries. No other police department anywhere in the world can come close to that.
So
that diversity,
it's diverse, yeah.
That diversity gives a tremendous flexibility, language skills, that sort of thing. We also assign people overseas. Why do we do that? Well, when I was in customs, I had legal attaches in
you were the head of the customs service.
Yes, in other countries. We have them there as listening posts, as tripwires for things that are going to or possibly happen in New York, to commingle with the police there, and also to gather information on terrorist events that happen so that we can bring back granular information and use it to better protect New York. Mumbai is an example of that. We had people on the ground there right after the shooting stopped. We got really detailed information. With less than a week, we had 400 people in our auditorium at One Police Plaza. We had a telephone hookup with these 3 police officers that we sent to Mumbai, giving very detailed information. We had a 75-page report that was done, which he gave to the FBI that morning. Well, I had a tabletop exercise with all our commanders, and we had an actual exercise in Floyd Bennett Field showing a situation roughly like what happened in Mumbai, with our police officers addressing it. That's what we wanted speed. We didn't want to wait 2 years for a federal report on what happened in Mumbai. And New York, no question about it, still a target. That's one of the reasons why we deployed people overseas.
You came to attention first. We talked earlier about your rise from cadet to commissioner. A key turning point was your involvement in helping the city cope with the Crown Heights riot in the early 1990s. Whatever you want to call it, a riot, but right. Civil disturbance. I wonder if you think about when you see Baltimore, Ferguson, uprising, so-called today, civil disturbances, about the lessons that you learned in Crown Heights and how you might apply them, and whether you see them being applied well in these other situations.
Yeah, well, these lessons apparently have to be learned, because Ferguson was terribly mishandled by the authorities there. The spokesperson for Ferguson turned out to be, I think, Darius Johnson, who was Michael Brown's companion, because nobody from the city was talking about it. So he turns out, in the Justice Department report, he's identified as being a liar. He simply made things up. But that's who was talking to CNN and other media outlets after the shooting took place. So they put nobody up to talk about it. They left Michael Brown's body in the street. He was shot, let's say, at noon, left his body there for over 4 hours. You couldn't tell who was in charge, because you had the city, you had the county police, you ultimately had the state police come in. I mean, it was a myriad of errors. And ironically, Darren Wilson, the cop, accused of all of this, is exonerated by a Justice Department report on March 4th of this year. And what do? They conflate it with a report about the city of Ferguson. They don't even give, I say it in the book, they don't even give him 1 day. Hey, he was exonerated. His Michael Brown's DNA is found on Officer Wilson's collar. His DNA is found on his gun, which supports the story that he really had no choice but to act as the way he did. But they tie it to the report of Ferguson, which appears to be a dysfunctional city, or certainly a city that needs a lot of help. So just lots of mistakes there. And, what you do see, what I saw is a couple of weeks after that, there was a shooting in St. Louis, which is not in St. Louis County, but adjacent to it. The chief of police was out within an hour on television telling people what happened. You've got to get information out. And this is what we know, this is what we don't know, more to follow. Because if you don't do that, someone else is laying the scenario out, and that's precisely what happened in Ferguson.
And in Baltimore, of course, the police were said to be hanging back.
Yeah.
And as our own Heather McDonald has talked about, a Ferguson effect that was surfaced there in terms of inhibiting police, and the more general concern has arisen about that. Did you see that in the situation in Baltimore, and do you see it as a follow-on problem?
Absolutely. I was shocked. You see maybe 75, 100 police officers a block away from a CVS that is being looted and ultimately burned, and they didn't do anything. I was really shocked at that. I'm even surprised that I don't care who was holding them back. The cops didn't go down there themselves and do it. I mean, it's sort of why people become police officers. It's sort of in the DNA, and to see them hold back or be held back like that was shocking. It was clearly a case of where no effort was made, and they lived to pay the price for that.
This is a book about leadership, specific leadership in policing, but you have this great, surprising anecdote in there about how Mayor Bloomberg, before he offered you the police commissioner job, floated the idea that, would you like to be schools chancellor? And it's just an aside, but it raises the question whether leadership is transferable across different types of organizations, whether there is some kind of a leadership DNA, because the mayor seemed to think so and thinks you would have done a good job.
Well, the mayor does think so, that, and he does it in his company. He moves people around. I say that everything I learned about leadership, virtually everything I learned in the Marine Corps. I have a great way of teaching things. I know the Marine Corps leadership traits. There are 14 of them. I have my little black organization book. I have them in there virtually every day. I look at them. So I think leaders are certainly made and not born. You would adopt the traits of a leader, the way you talk, the way you act, you follow certain principles. So yeah, I think it's transferable, but you also need sort of a base amount of skill set or skill knowledge in particular areas before you can you can apply that. But I think it's a good leader can move into virtually any situation with a certain amount of basic training about the business operations and do a good job.
There may be some people who would like you to be school chancellor today. I don't know.
No, thank you.
Last question for me before we open it up to the audience. As you must feel so different not to be responsible when you wake up every morning. Do you miss it, or is it frustrating, or is it a relief?
Well, I was in the police department for over 40 years. I was in government probably close to 50 years. So it was definitely time for me to leave, and I don't miss just kind of the operational things. I thought I would, but I don't. But I do miss the people. I keep in contact with some of them. You build up these relationships over a long period of time. It's only understandable that you miss being with certain people. Great.
Okay. We've got time for some questions, and I see J.P. Donlin from Chief Executive Magazine, and this is definitely an executive.
Thank you, Howard. Big data is transforming business, healthcare, energy, and virtually every other enterprise. I'm curious how data analytics is being used to not so much fight crime, but to deter or to confront terrorists. You mentioned the 16 incidents that were thwarted. It's really a two-part question. Which police force in the U.S. is most advanced in using data analytics, and can it be used to fight terrorism?
Okay, it's not you, it's me. I'm a
said,
disabled veteran.
The question is, about data analytics, which is the most advanced police department, in your opinion, in using data analytics? And can data analytics methods be applied not just to street policing, if you will, but to anti-terrorism?
Well, I think reality is that the vast majority of cities don't see themselves under a terrorist threat. They just don't. And you can tell by the lack of attention they pay to it. For instance, in Boston, this is not a criticism, in Boston they had 2 members of the Boston Police Department on the Joint Terrorism Task Force with the FBI. I mean, a little bit of ticket punching there. So if you're talking about data analytics to protect in the area of counterterrorism, I would say NYPD is the leader, and we brought in a lot of technology, and we brought in some really top-notch people to help in that regard. People from the CIA, David Cohn I think he's just such a terrific public servant, 35 years in the CIA. And as a result of David coming on board, we were able to get other people from the intelligence community to work for us. We brought in IT people. I went to Lou Gershner, who was a former CEO of IBM, said, we need help in this area. He recommended Jim Analfo to me. Jim has been the CIO of Kraft Foods and Stanley Tools. And it really changed the mindset. Up until then, I think the department, I don't want to diminish what other people did in the area of IT, because I think, quite frankly, the resources weren't there to make it a difference, and that's sort of historically through generations. But data analytics is ongoing now in the NYPD. To the best of my knowledge, as far as terrorism is concerned, you don't see it in very many, if any, municipal police agencies. One of the things you have in policing is people or departments claiming they're doing things, and it's not happening. It goes back to the days of community policing, or when community policing first came out. You'd have community policing written on the side of a police car, and hey, that was it. We're doing it. So that's part of the issue. But anyway, I hope that answers.
Well,
your
but
question.
maybe a specific about how you can use data to identify one of these 16 terror plots.
Well, what I think can be done is a use of the diversity of the department, using IT capacity also to, say, go to chat rooms. Now, chat rooms are interesting places. A lot of times you need a password to get into the password to get into the chat room. But because of NYPD's diversity, people who are, let's say, born on the streets of Karachi, who can speak in idiomatic terms where others can't if you go to Middlebury College and learn it. So the diversity of the department linked with technological advances, I think, helped the department use its capacity to at least attempt to identify terrorists. It gets more and more difficult. There's no question about it. ISIS is putting out 90,000 tweets a day. They're putting out a very sophisticated recruitment videos, extremely well done. And they also have what I'll call chat rooms, where you have one-on-one conversations that nobody else can get into. So it's demanding. It is a challenge every day. But the department, I believe, is probably better positioned, certainly than any municipal agency, to handle it.
Heather McDonald. Just wait for the mic. And in case anybody has not been following Heather's writing about police departments, you might want to start.
Everything I know I learned from Commissioner Kelly. Commissioner, I would love your historical perspective on the current moment of political rhetoric against the police. We have our president who frequently now is claiming that the criminal justice system is racist, that blacks are correct to think that the police treat them differently than whites. This is certainly a theme of the former Attorney General Eric Holder. It's not just the political establishment. University presidents, Drew Gilpin Faust of Harvard has claimed that we still face huge civil rights problems in policing. How does this compare to other moments, such as the 1960s and 1970s, where you had also strong anti-cop rhetoric? My impression is that was confined to a group of marginal radicals, whereas today, the narrative against the police is embraced by the most powerful members of the establishment. How does it compare? And if it doesn't change, how do you think this is going to affect policing and public safety in the United States?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I've been in the business, I'm out of it now, but I was in business for a long time, and it always seemed that there was this attack on the police certainly coming from the left. It's more embedded now in the university structure than I've ever seen it, and I can point out examples of where a professor would have the temerity to look as if supporting the police, and his career would be significant. His career was significantly impacted. So it's very difficult to find a school or a teaching institution that is not critical, either directly or indirectly, of police and police activities. And now with the 24-hour news cycle, now with social media, I mean, that's just tough to go up against. There's nobody really speaking out against it. There's really nobody on the other side, other than, we'll say, certain radio stations, certainly certain communications companies, that sort of thing. But academia look strongly against police. And Heather, you identified the term Ferguson effect, and I think this is part of it. This is what we see is a backing off from proactive policing throughout the country. New York is a leader in so many things. What happens here certainly reverberates throughout the country. We had Ferguson, we had Baltimore, we've had some terrible shootings. Don't get me wrong, the terrible murder of Walter Scott in North Charleston, South Carolina was just jolting. But it's an aberration, and I know from my time, certainly in my head, cops just do terrific work day in and day out, saving lives. And that's why I think cameras are okay. And I wasn't always for them, but I think cameras will show just heroic, terrific work on the part of police day in and day out with a small number of inappropriate activities. But does it make it difficult? Yeah. And don't forget, we're dealing with civil servants here. These are people who have a job. They're going to have a job. So they can back off and not suffer any penalty. It's not like, hey, you're in a private sector, you're not doing your job as the way we want it, you're going to go. No. So it's complex as to how you get them to go back to the engagement that I think is appropriate, an engagement that reduce crime for 2+ decades in this country.
Michael Myers, hang on for the microphone, please.
Thank you. I'm Michael Myers, Executive Director of the New York Civil Rights Coalition. Commissioner, I wonder if you might comment on the proposals and strategies, including those from your successor, the Police Commissioner of New York, Mr. Bratt. The proposals and strategies for holding police officers accountable who do engage in misconduct, serious misconduct, and other misconduct. Commissioner Bratton has said we have to retrain the entire police force. To what? I don't know. Maybe you have a comment about that. There has been also questions about the laxness of police commissioners in terms of punishing police officers who have been substantiated to have engaged in misconduct. They give them a few vacation days off. Vacation days that get punished, as opposed to removed from the police force. And finally, the governor has imposed executive accountability, pushing to the Attorney General's office the prosecution, the investigation, and possible prosecution of police officers where civilians are or lose their lives as a result of police misconduct. So I wish your comments on those three aspects of holding police officers accountable and responsible for misconduct, substantiated misconduct.
Well, we give police officers awesome power. They are the government with the ability to use deadly force out there at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I think police officers have to be held accountable. I would have my record stand up against anybody who was commissioner in the police department. I'm not exactly certain what policy changes you're talking about. It's easy to talk about things. In terms of training, I put in the Committee for Law Enforcement Accreditation came in, did an assessment of the NYPD, and when I came in 2003, and it was done again every 2 years, and we met all of the training criteria. There is no director of training right now. It hasn't been a director of training in the NYPD for a year, the deputy commissioner of training. But I support training, and I'm not certain what the details are. But I certainly think of myself as someone who holds police officers accountable. The penalties that can be given are limited by collective bargaining agreement. Ultimately, penalties are recommended by the disciplinary system in the department to the police commissioner, and I think I'm proud of the job that I did in that regard, and we'll see. I know there's maybe some rhetoric out there, but let's see what happens on this watch.
What about the governor's executive order?
I'm sorry?
You said the governor's executive order?
On what? On the
Removing the DAs from the prosecution.
Yeah, I generally support that. I can understand that. I know the DAs don't like it. We have 5 district attorneys in this city. We have 2 U.S. attorneys in the city, and I can understand them saying, "Hey, we don't need that." But the governor's also addressing situations upstate. So for me, it's like 60-40. I can support it, and I think it's probably a smart political move on the part of the governor.
When you talk about the universities, you were subjected yourself to a rather unpleasant situation at Brown University, where students seemed to think they didn't have anything to learn from you. I wonder if you could comment on what do you see as the roots of that animosity that you identify in academia?
Well, Brown University is an unusual place. They actually allow people from outside the university, from Providence in this case, to go into classes. And my understanding is that's who sort of led this movement. The professor, I was invited to go there by a professor, an endowed chair, endowed by 2 New Yorkers whose son was killed in the 90s, and parents, and they were there. It was a very cordial invitation. And I said yes. Well, what happened apparently is a lot of activity on the internet, and the night before, a student group commingled with this citizen group, picketed in front of the professor's residence. Well, this totally changed his tune. We were supposed to have a reception beforehand. There was no reception. I came in, There were some police chiefs there from other jurisdictions. The room was a small room, maybe 200 people, but there was another couple hundred people outside waiting to get in. There was one security person in the room. It was a woman in uniform. And when this professor got up, he lit into me. You know, so I got up and said, where would you get the nerve to give me that type of invitation? You invited me here. But he totally changed his, his tune. So I got up, I started to speak, and they had people in the audience with written statements. And one person would get up and make the statement, a person would sit down, another person would get up and sit down. Well, I said, I'm not leaving. A woman came in who was the dean of some position. She spoke to them, and I told her, you want to call us off, fine, but I'm not leaving. So she ultimately, called it off. That's my experience. That's really what I know about it. I did get a call from Mr. Tisch, the chairman of the board. I got a call from the president, but I was willing to go back, and I'm still waiting for that call.
If anybody has a written statement, I'd be glad to identify it. Couple more questions for the commissioner. I know we had one over here for a while ago. Yeah.
Hi, I'm raising 2 kids in the Upper West Side of New York, and since the de Blasio administration came into power, there's been a clear decline in the quality of life. There's a lot of neighborhoods I can't take my kids without being accosted by mentally ill homeless people shooting up. What can the average citizen do to counter this, rapid change in quality of life?
Vote. I think it's very difficult now. I think, there is a 311 system in the city that is for the registering of quality of life complaints. In each police precinct, there are 2 computers. There's a queue, quality of life queue, that surfaces every day. And the desk officer is responsible to seeing to it that queue is addressed. So I wouldn't, just write off notifying the police. I think you can do that. Call the 311 or call the station house and have them respond, or at least you'll be in a position to see if they responded. I think if you, submit on the record a certain number of complaints, that you should be able to get some response. But it's difficult. I understand. There's this feeling of drift that is out there as far as quality of life is concerned.
Way in the back, I was going to say, we got a few more, so we got a couple more minutes. Let's try to get them all in. Nicole Gelinas, Manhattan Institute.
Commissioner, your successor has said that he wants to rip out the Times Square plazas. He finds the plazas that your boss put in place very difficult to police. Can we police the plazas without having the cars and trucks back to do it for us? And if so, how? Thank you.
The last part.
Can we police the plazas without having, she's speaking kind of a little bit ironically, without having the cars and trucks back?
I don't believe we should be ripping it up by any means. It would be total surrender. I think the issue we just talked about this is aggressive panhandling. And there's a law against aggressive panhandling, and you can address it. And you can address it with undercover people. There are 35,000 NYPD uniform officers. You can get male, female, whatever you want to go there. You record it, of course, as we can do today. You video it, you record it, and you go to court with it. And you keep doing it. You keep doing it. And aggressive panhandling is what really turns people off and turns visitors off. And I think if we address that, you have to realize that, the topless situation is now legal to be topless in New York State. And these women are covered with paint. So depending on their approach, if in fact it can be tempered where it's not overly aggressive, that's life in New York. But I certainly don't think we should be tearing up the the plaza as it exists.
Ken Gilman, we have two more questions, one here and one here. Okay.
Commissioner, you mentioned, perhaps tongue-in-cheek, to vote. Do you have any notions as to what the opponent to the incumbent, what qualities that person's going to have in order to present a credible alternative, in order to get people to come out and vote?
Well, I think
I know you're not going to declare your intentions here, but I was just wondering as to what you thought those qualities ought to be.
well, there's a couple of different areas that you have to look at. I think Mayor de Blasio won by skillfully going way to the left and parsing the electorate and getting over that 40% hurdle with about 282,000 votes in a city with 4.6 million registered voters. But he did it, and he did it well. So I think his concern is, I'm told, an attack from the left, where somebody gets to the left of him. So I think that's one of the reasons why you don't see him moving to the center. You would think, logically, to govern, you kind of have to move to the middle. He really hasn't done that because he's concerned about somebody coming in and parsing as he did. I think you need somebody, obviously a candidate of color, I think would have an edge. You need a lot of money, and I think there'll be a lot of people offering a lot of money because of, or offering up a lot of money because of displeasure in certain areas with what the mayor is doing. So a proven executive, someone who has access to significant money, run as an independent. I don't think running as a Republican can work in this city. Some famous politician once said to me that 40% of the people in the city will vote Democratic. It could be Mickey Mouse, they don't care who it is. 20% will vote Republican, and that's it, on the Republican line. If you run as an independent and the Republicans sort of adopt you, well, that's okay. But interesting, in that dynamic, you can do a lot of things in that center 40%. By having an independent run, who's a gadfly, somebody who gets 10% of the vote, guarantees the election to the Democrat, the person on the Democratic line. So there's a lot of machinations there. To answer your question, I think a wealthy minority candidate would be ideal.
Last question right here. That was your question too?
I was going to add and take an addendum to the lady's question about quality of life on the West Side, and I thought that the solution to that would be to draft Ray Kelly for mayor.
Well, there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm for drafting Ray Kelly.
All right. No, thank you.
Yeah. Please join me in thanking Commissioner Ray Kelly.
Thank you.